overview of gifted and talented education and the types of strategies that schools can put in place to support gifted and talented learners. I'd like to open with this quote from Rita Pearson: "Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connections and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be." I open with this quote because I believe it to be very fitting to our discussion today. We often apply sentiments like this in relation to students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and rightly so. However, research reveals that many gifted and talented never reach their full potential of their giftedness. Therefore, it is essential that teachers have a thorough understanding of what it means to be gifted and talented and how to support gifted and talented learners to develop their potential. So why learn about gifted and talented education? Gifted and talented students deserve access to rigorous, relevant and engaging learning opportunities that extend and enrich their gifts and talents. Framing this topic in relation to the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers, this links to APSTs 1.5 and 1.1, Knowing Students and How They Learn, 3.1, which is related to planning for and implementing effective teaching and learning, and 6.2, which addresses engaging in professional learning, which is what you are doing right now. Here's a little bit of a flying content overview of my presentation today. Firstly, we'll look at what does it mean to be gifted and talented. I want to give you a definition of gifted and talented learners and highlight some identifying traits that you might find in your gifted and talented learners. Secondly, I want to address what are some challenges faced by gifted and talented learners. I would like to address the challenge of identification. I would like to address some of the negative aspects of gifted and talented traits. Thirdly, I'd like to address gifted and talented underachievers. I really want to highlight who to look out for in your classrooms. There are two particular groups that I want to highlight: Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander gifted and talented students, and gifted and talented students with disabilities. Finally, I'll wrap it all up by telling you how you can support gifted and talented learners in your mainstream classroom. I'd like to present some differentiation strategies and 2 models, along with a few resources that you can use to support your students. So, identifying gifted and talented. What makes a student gifted and talented? While there is no universally agreed upon definition of what constitutes a gifted and talented learner, the National Association for Gifted Children proposes that generally students with gifts and talents perform or have the capability to perform at higher levels compared to others of the same age, experience and environment in one or more domains. They require modifications to their educational experiences to learn and realise their potential. The developmental process. One prominent gifted and talented theorist is Professor Francois Gange, who developed the differentiating model of giftedness and talent, which proposes key differences between the concepts of giftedness and talents. To simplify his model, Gange asserts that in order for a student to develop their talents, for example, scientific and technological abilities, they must be provided with environmental and intrapersonal catalysts in order to develop their potential. For example, a child may display giftedness in creativity. Perhaps they are more observant, see the world in deviant ways, or deeply engage in creative activities. However, with the right direction, this natural giftedness could be channeled into any number of talents such as fine art, graphic design, or photography. The New South Wales Department of Education simplifies this model and identifies 4 key domains of giftedness. These are intellectual giftedness, in which the language and thought of a student is more developmentally advanced. Social emotional giftedness, in which a student has advanced emotional intelligence. Creative giftedness. These students are often unconventional thinkers who perhaps present as being quite problematic in the classrooms and are often misidentified. And finally, physically gifted students who have advanced motor skills for their developmental age. Further breaking down these 4 domains identified, gifted students often display common traits such as these. They may learn rapidly. They may have an extensive vocabulary or an excellent memory. Maybe they're a keen observer or have a vivid imagination. They could be highly creative, morally sensitive, have a wide range of interest, and any number of these traits. Dr. Linda Silverman developed this list of traits and suggests that if a child displays over 3/4 of these traits, they are likely gifted. There are also some challenges that come with being gifted and talented. The first of these challenges is the issue of identification. So Gange's estimation that 10% of children are gifted would suggest that there are around 380,000 gifted and talented children in Australian classrooms. Unfortunately, their educational needs are not being catered for effectively or adequately, which leads to behavioural issues, underachievement, psychological stress, and frustration. Many gifted and talented students go unidentified and never reach their full potential. This is due to a combination of factors including teacher and professional misbelief, inadequate assessment practices, and barriers to assessment. For example, financial concern, racial or cultural discrimination or biases, or lack of perceived value in assessment. It is hoped that this will change in the future, but for now it highlights how important it is for teachers to know the traits and indicators, have a strong differentiation practice in their classrooms, and know pathways to support gifted and talented learners. Gifted and talented learners often operate on a different wavelength to many of their peers and consequently can often be seen as having negative traits. Their minds think in divergent ways. They experience the world deeply and often display emotional hypersensitivity. This is not an exhaustive list of challenges, but a few key challenges include uneven mental development, interpersonal difficulties with peers, and emotional sensitivity. Gifted and talented students can also experience frustration and anger, particularly when they are inadequately engaged or supported. Gifted and talented students need to be supported to work with their strengths as well as their weaknesses. As teachers, this might look like being aware of their need for variable differentiation across KLAs, finding like-minded peers for them to socialise with, or connecting their families with local gifted and talented organisations, and implementing positive wellbeing practices within your classroom, such as mindfulness, positive affirmations, or growth mindset practices. Among the challenges faced by gifted and talented learners is the issue of underachievement. These are gifted and talented students who are not afforded the opportunity to meet their full potential. Research tells us that up to 50% of gifted and talented students do not reach their full potential in school. This statistic is reflected throughout the Gifted and Talented report from the Victorian Government, which states that gifted education in Australia is not meeting the needs of gifted and talented students. It is estimated that between 10 and 40% of gifted and talented students drop out before finishing high school. Why is this? Gange's model would propose that these students have not had the proper catalysts to develop their natural abilities into talents. However, factors such as home and school environment and peer influence can play a part as well. Perhaps it's the nature of the curriculum. Is it stimulating enough for these learners? In addition to this, affective characteristics have been shown to impact a student's performance and development. Factors such as their sense of self-efficacy, expectations for achievement, their academic locus of control, and academic self-concept. However, some researchers suggest that part of the issue lies in the identification of underachievers. Wellish asserts that Gange's prominent model leaves underachievers without legitimate claim for identification or without an appropriate educational pathway, as it neglects to account for factors in underachievement such as disability, socio-emotional problems, trauma, or socio-economic factors. I'd like to highlight two student groups of particular concern before closing with a summary of practical applications for your classroom. The first at-risk group is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learners. There is a disproportionately low representation of ATSI students in gifted and talented programs, despite the research around percentages of gifted and talented students across cultural groups. This is potentially explained through the existence of the deficit thinking paradigm, which attributes lower academic ability to students on the basis of their racial, social, or cultural background. The deficit view has been used by some to explain why children from cultural minorities and/or low SES groups often score lower on IQ tests and perform at lower levels in the classroom. Identification of ATSI gifted and talented students also poses to be problematic. Teacher and community low expectations on academic performance, the way in which success is measured in Aboriginal versus non-Aboriginal communities, and tensions between the maintenance of their cultural identity and desire for academic success all contribute to the lack of adequate identification of gifted and talented ATSI learners. It is worth noting too that the historical labelling of young Aboriginal people as being uneducatable or savage within Western education has no doubt contributed to the low identification of gifted and talented learners in these communities, as they possess unique knowledge and skills which may not be recognised by standardised testing. The next group that I'd like to look at is gifted and talented students with disability, or twice exceptional children. Gifted and talented students with disabilities are often overlooked by gifted and talented program selection, and schools fail to accommodate them. Furthermore, interventions for these students will often focus on addressing deficits rather than developing potential. As their disability often overlaps with the high potential or their abilities, the student will often be misidentified. More research is required in this area, but teachers should be aware of gifted and talented students with disabilities and put supports in place appropriate to the disability while extending their strengths and treating them as any other gifted and talented student. Gifted and talented students are like any other children in your class. They require engagement, connection, and interest in the classroom environment. They require a curriculum that is differentiated to their point of need. So you may ask, how do I do that? I'm only one teacher in a room of 25 to 30 students. I propose to you that you most likely already know how to differentiate, but perhaps you need some fresh inspiration to think outside the box for your gifted and talented learners. So, here is how to support gifted and talented learners in the mainstream classroom. The key to gifted and talented education is quality differentiation. Many teachers have concerns over needing a completely different program for gifted and talented learners, but this is not so. By differentiating the existing curriculum, you can meet every learner at their point of need, including gifted and talented students. Akara suggests 3 modes of differentiation, and your differentiation practice may include any combination of these 3 methods. Acceleration refers to a faster movement through standard content or providing access to higher than age level content. There are many types of acceleration, such as early entry to school, working with a higher stage content, grade skipping, and subject skipping. However, not all of these are equal in merit, depending on the all-round maturity of the child. Enrichment, however, allows for greater breadth of learning. Perhaps it is allowing students to explore related topics and ideas. Finally, extension offers students with more depth within the topic. This may look like providing opportunities for students to engage in higher order thinking processes of applying and creating with the knowledge that they gain. All of these methods can be applied to the content, the process, or the product of learning to successfully differentiate for the needs of gifted and talented learners. I'd like you to consider 2 models of education within your classroom. The first is universal design for learning, and the second is project-based learning. In summation, universal design for learning provides for multiple means of engagement, including but not limited to optimizing choice and autonomy, varying demands to optimize the challenge, and optimizing motivation. It provides for multiple means of representation, which gives students choice in how they view, comprehend, and absorb information, and multiple means of action and expression, including options for the construction of their work. This model can be powerfully used to differentiate for gifted and talented learners, allowing them choice, autonomy, and depth in their learning. Project-based learning also has applications for gifted and talented students, as it facilitates deep learning into a topic and requires students to solve a problem that is not easily solved. Students will investigate a complex problem or challenge, and it engages gifted and talented learners and enables them to stretch their potential. Finally, I'd like to leave you with a list of a few resources to go away and look at for your gifted and talented learners. There are many organisations that can help, but here are a few that I've found to be quite helpful. The Australian Association for the Education of the Gifted and Talented, they have a plethora of resources for young people, for teachers, for parents, so I highly recommend them. There's a number of competitions that you can get your gifted and talented learners involved in, such as Tournament of Minds, the Olympiads, the Rio Tinto Big Science Challenge, and there are some other private and university-run programs that they can get involved in. You can also enrich the experience of your gifted and talented learners through in-school enrichment programs, such as offering STEM clubs during lunch breaks or music clubs. You can also get them involved in state associations. In New South Wales, we have Gifted New South Wales, and they are a great resource for gifted and talented families. Finally, you might like to look at interest-specific programs, such as the Sydney Youth Orchestra programs. Thank you so much for watching my presentation, and I hope that you have learned something that you can take back into your classrooms, and I hope that you have a better understanding of gifted and talented learners.